All right, y'all thought that I might be fibbing. This is proof right now. The Letterman podcast. We have one sponsor only, but it is Rupert G and the Hello Deli. Thank you very much for sponsoring our show, Rupert.
It's my honor, Mike.
La, 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 la. Welcome once again to the Letterman podcast. As always, my name is Mike Chisholm. As always, I am excited and grateful and all of that crap to be here. This is so much fun. I love doing this show. Oh my gosh. It is currently, full disclosure, it is currently a Saturday morning. And I just finished. So like, this is like one of those time warp things. I'm doing an intro to an episode that I just finished, because that's how it works sometimes. That's the magic of podcasts, ladies and gentlemen. That's what happens sometimes. And I'm really glad that I didn't shoot the intro beforehand. If I had, I would have discarded it and reshot it. Actually, I've done that a lot, and I've got all these videos of intros and outros that weren't used because something has occurred to compel me to change directions or whatever. This would have certainly been one of those, because if I would have shot an intro for Jill beforehand, it just, it wouldn't have sufficed. I don't care what I would have said or done. It wouldn't have worked, because I just had this absolutely phenomenal conversation. It's in my past, but it's in your future. Jill Bayor came on the show. Who was Jill Bayor? Well, she was one of David Letterman's assistants. She was on the team with Lori Diamond and in the inner circle with Dave at the latter years of NBC. So when Dave made the transition over, Jill had already left. She left late night because she was there as doing an unpaid gig as one of Dave's assistants, and that's how people cut their teeth. I mean, how many people have we had on here who worked for the show unpaid for a long time, but cutting their teeth and learning immense things and having unbelievable life experiences in the process? Jill is one of those folks, and boy, did she ever have a lot of very cool life experiences working for late night, some of which she shared here. And then she moved over to a paid gig. She moved over to Saturday Night Live after that. Ended up doing a whole bunch of different things, including working for Friends as well. We touch on those in the episode. Clearly just building rapport, so she can come back on and we can just play and have fun with anecdotes from her time in show business. Very, very cool episode. I recommend this episode for anybody who's a creative that maybe hasn't stretched those muscles like they would like to. And Jill is just a fantastic soul. She's amazing. We had a really great conversation. Again, I wish that I could rewind myself and turn back time so I could experience it for the very first time. You all are extremely fortunate because you get to see it and hear it for the very first time. Jill Bayor, a guest here on the Letterman podcast. Please enjoy. And did you I'm really, really curious as to how you ended up in the 30 Rock ethos and working for Dave at that point, because it's so cool to know the lore of people, how when the transition happened from NBC to CBS, many people came with the show, but at that point they were like NBC employees, and then they became Pants employees. You were an NBC employee, right?
I was an NBC employee. I went to SNL. So that's what happened. So
Okay.
I never worked at CBS. I was at 30 Rock at NBC. It was a little earlier than the move. It was I was like 90, 91.
Yep.
So it was a lot of the behind the scenes stuff was happening in terms of him trying to, meaning Dave, trying to plot, his next course of action. But in terms of me, I was at NBC, and then because we were all in the same building, I knew a lot of the SNL people already. Yeah. A lot of the crew was the same. So I shifted over there because I thought that was a better position for me professionally. They were going to make me, and so that's, so I moved over there. So I never did work at CBS.
Okay, so I love I love that because, you know, here you are sitting there as Dave's assistant, and I definitely want to talk about some of these day-to-day things you would have seen, because you would have seen a lot of shit being Dave's assistant in a good way. I want to talk, before we finish this podcast, I want to ask if Jeff Altman ever called in, if you ever got to hear any of his voices, that kind of stuff. Okay.
No, absolutely.
But then moving over, you know, wanting to be a creative, wanting to be in this, and Dave's assistant is a crazy cool gig, but the professional in you, you know, Harvard, wanting to be a writer, that kind of a thing, you know, you wanted to exercise those muscles, and staying there, I can understand why you would have moved over. That being said, before you moved over to SNL, you would have seen some of those SNL castmates showing up on your floor of the building to get glimpses of Dave and whatnot, and then you'd end up going over to work with them. This is the time frame that we're talking about, right?
Sure, absolutely. You know, I didn't pay any attention to anybody but Dave. Like, I was
Yeah, well, I can imagine.
Such laser focus that I could care less who else was around. And so I literally had no interest really in the SNL people. And I was just so thrilled to be on the Letterman show. That's exactly where I wanted to be. It was my dream job at the time. And so I didn't pay attention to any of the celebrities who were around. I was just focused on Dave, which
okay. So there we go. We've done a great job already setting a table. Let's go back before you got the job.
Okay.
You were at Harvard. Were you at Harvard for to be a writer?
So my college career was all like split up, and it's because I worked at Letterman and SNL while I was still in college. So I actually went to 3 schools.
Wow.
I went to Emory, NYU, and then graduated from Harvard. So it's I my whole college career, I should have graduated in 91. I graduated in 95. Yep. And it was just a mess, but it worked. And when I got the Letterman job, I was at Emory University in Georgia.
Okay, so you're okay. Did you come there as an intern?
Yes, and I had grown up in Georgia, and I was at Emory, and it was the wrong school for me. I really disliked it there, and so and it was also when Dave was like the height of his popularity, and all the college kids were, you know, it was for my age group, being a college kid at that time, it was the height, and I remember being so miserable at Emory, like my freshman year, that I just thought, I got to get out of here. How can I get out of here? I got to get out of here. And then I thought to myself, if I could do anything at all in the world, what would I want to do? And I thought, you know, if I could do absolutely anything, and I knew nobody in entertainment, no one. I mean, I'm living in the South. I grew up in Georgia. I had no connections, and I just sat I remember I like had gone home for the weekend or something, and I was sitting in my parents' dining room, and I just thought, if I could do anything in the world, what would I want to do? And I just thought, you know, I would love to work for David Letterman. And that started the trajectory. And so what happened was, you know, I had seen on the show, you know, that he would have interns on. Yep. And I was, you know, it was like a mirror. I was like, they're my age. If they can do that, why can't I do that? And so then I kind of, you know, this was before the internet, like there was no way to find out this information. Yep. And so I just started calling. I didn't even understand how TV shows worked. I didn't even understand like their production offices and their, you know, and I didn't know any of that, but I called like literally the operator at 30 Rock and said, you know, how do you become an intern on the Letterman show?
Oh my God, you're getting career advice from the person answering the phone
from the
at 30 Rockefeller Center.
At 30 Rock. And so she eventually, like, she connected me to the production office. And that was the first time I knew there was a production office. And, you know, all I got is a receptionist who's a gatekeeper. And basically what happened is finally the receptionist, after many tries, like I must have called like 20 times over a period of months. Yeah. Finally, the receptionist put me in touch with this woman named Colette Coleman, who was Morty's assistant, who handled the hiring of the interns. And I ended up calling her for 6 months. So we had, you know, I said, I'm interested in being an intern. how do I do that? And you know, it's very selective, and we had a nice chat, and I said, would you mind if I called you again in a few weeks just to check in? Because I think she said, like, we're filled up for months in advance, it's very selective, basically telling me no way.
Yeah.
And I was very polite, and I just said, would you mind if I, you know, checked back in every, like, you know, 3 or 4 weeks just to see by chance if anything opens up? And she's, you know, she's like, yeah, that's fine, you can call back. And so for 6 months, I called every like 2 to 3 weeks.
Yep.
And had a quick chat with her. And at the time, I still wanted to get out of Emory because I hated it. And I knew I just had to get to New York. Like that was, it's like, I bet I could leverage myself if I could just get there. And
it calls out like a magnet, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, the truth is I was actually born there, and then, but then my family moved to Georgia when I was 4. So I did have some sense of the city, because I had lived there for a few, you know, my early age, I had lived there. My grandparents lived there. My whole family, extended family, lived there. So I did have a kind of a base. But anyway, so I got a job as an intern at Rolling Stone magazine, because I thought, let me just get there.
No kidding.
Yeah. So I did that. That was like the first internship I ever had. It got me out of Georgia, got me to New York. And then once I was in New York, I kept calling Colette Coleman and just saying, is there a chance? What do I have to do? Can I get in there? And finally, at the end, at like 6 months of me calling, she's like, well, you know, we actually had someone quit yesterday. Could you come in tomorrow?
Oh.
And I said, yes.
I love that. I love that.
And,
before we get to that, just a quick aside.
Sure.
Did you, while you were at Rolling Stone, did you ever run into Sheila Rogers?
You know, I knew her later at Letterman, but I did not know her there.
Okay. So anyway, just curious about that. It's funny how these things all kind of end up interconnecting. The New York community,
especially in Manhattan, was like, it's small. It's not as, you know, big. People know each other, and you know, there's everyone circles in the same social group. So yeah, so it's really not as large a community as one would think. But anyway, so yeah, so I got into the meeting, you know, thinking I'm going for an internship meeting. And when I get there, I was just thrilled to be up in the offices. I actually thought that was going to be the end of it. Like, I literally thought, this is my goal. I got to the show that I love so much.
Yep.
And I got to see behind the scenes, and I thought that would just be an experience, and that would be it. And I would be thrilled with that.
Okay, so I gotta ask questions. I gotta ask questions about this. Like,
absolutely.
Clearly, you know, you don't have a ton of experience in 30 Rock. This might have been your first time, you know, past the lobby of 30 Rock.
Yeah, I've never been there.
Okay, when you go up, is it an experience where, because I mean, I've seen Seth there before, not Seth, I've seen Fallon, which is, you know, in the opposite studio, and I mean, I've been to 30 Rock as a tourist in the lobby, that kind of a thing. When you go up there, are you ushered right to offices that are not familiar whatsoever, or were there elements when you went there for that first meeting where you're like, oh, there's something familiar right there, I recognize that, or there's the entrance to the airlock, there's the, like, did you see anything that was familiar?
That was on a different floor. So so the studios were on the 6th floor, and the offices were on, and I don't even remember, were they on because I mix them up with SNL. I think they were on the 14th floor.
Okay, so yeah, where Dave would have hijinks, you know, whether he's throwing baseballs out of a window or accidentally,
that's where the staff offices were, and the writers and Morty, and
they were up there. Okay,
yeah, talent,
up on 14. I think that's right.
Everyone was on that floor. We only went down to the studio when we were actually rehearsing the show and taping the show.
Okay, and that first day you did not see any of that. You were up at the offices. No,
I went straight to, so, you know, they sent me up to the 14th floor in the elevator, and the elevator opens, and it's the only thing on the floor on that side of the building. And so it opens right up into the Letterman production offices, and the receptionist was right there. And then they brought me back to Colette's offices, she was Morty's assistant at the time. And so I'm in that office, And she said, you know, I know you're here for the internship. Someone quit yesterday. If we offered you a job, could you start right away? And
Oh,
I just
Jill.
said yes. 'Cause, you know, I was like,
Unbelievable.
yes, I'll just figure out my life. Remember, I wasn't even though I was interning at Rolling Stone, I mean, I was living with like 3 people downtown in the village. I had no like set up life here.
Yep.
And I just was winging it. And I was, you know, I was 19.
You were 19. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
So anyway, so I'm in the office and she said, okay, let me bring you down the hall. I had no idea what internship it was, what position it was. I was just like, it's surfing the wave. I was along for the ride.
Yep.
She takes me down the hallway. And this is where I start to see, like you said, things I recognize.
Okay.
So I reckon like the carpet up there was this royal blue color, and that's where I saw the hallways where I knew stuff, because I was an avid watcher of the show. And that's
so
where
remotes and little things that they would do asides that they would do upstairs.
again,
Yeah.
I was thrilled. It was like living, you know, visiting Disneyland. It's like I'm just here. This is the pinnacle. Nothing else will happen. This is just my day at the show. And so she takes me into an office. I don't know what office it is. And she sits me down with Lori Diamond, who was Dave's assistant at the time. But you know, and I knew who Lori was because I had watched the show, and she would always be on the sidelines in the studio, and Dave would cut away to her a lot. So I knew that she was
hell of a dancer.
Yeah. I knew she was his assistant, but that's all I knew.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there, and you know, I still don't know what job I'm interviewing for. And she, you know, she asked me a bunch of questions, and then she said something like, she's like, don't you think like entertainment is the problem with culture today, or something like that? And I made a joke. And I didn't know that Dave was in the ante room, like her office was like the ante room, his office was an offshoot of her office.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize he was listening to the interview. So I made some joke when she said that.
Do you remember the joke?
Yeah, it was, but it's not funny. So
I don't care. Hey, please.
Okay, I'm not going to deliver it right. I'm not a comedian.
That's okay. So
she said, don't you think, you know, and it was off the, like, it was just, you know, don't you think TV is like the, you know, the evil of the entertainment of pop culture today, or something like that? And I just shrugged and I said, yeah, but at least there's good condiments. Because
my God. Okay, she is literally setting the volleyball right there. And you, an off-the-cuff sarcastic response, it doesn't matter if it's like, you know, you're spiking it and not even knowing that you're spiking it, because that is the sensibility of everybody around that ethos. And you didn't even know it. You're 19.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Thank you.
Just so cool. Did Dave walk out right then?
I made this sarcastic comment just off the cuff.
Yep.
And I hear Dave laughing in his office. And he comes out and he goes, are you here for the job? And I said, yes. And I have no idea what the job is.
He comes out, yeah, she'll fit in. She'll be fine.
Zero. And I'm just like, yes. And he goes, okay, start, you know, you can start Wednesday. And I think this was Monday. And so I got the job that I didn't know what the job was. And they send me off and they're like, come back at Wednesday at like 10 a.m. And I'm like, okay. And I have no idea what the job is. And I don't want to ask anybody because I'm afraid of jinxing everything.
Yeah.
So I just show up at 10 a.m. on Monday morning, not knowing what I'm doing. And I find out I'm going to be Dave's assistant. So.
Okay. There's a few questions here.
So let me quote, because
please. Yes.
I did not get paid, but technically I was an intern, but yet the position before had been filled by someone who had been paid and was his assistant, kind of like a second assistant to Lori Diamond.
Yes.
And then then after me, it was a paid position. So I'm like the only one who didn't get paid. So internship assistant, but regardless, I was, you know, I then became, I mean, I was with him all the time, like 24/7. He became my whole life. And that office became my whole life. And I was immediately thrust into the inner circle of like my dream job and where I wanted to be.
Okay, what were you going, like, I know writing and being a creative is you. And I mean, you can even tell everything about you, it just shines out of you that you're a creative. There's no question about that. Uh I mean, I can't think of a better environment to be thrust into to allow those things to kind of flourish out of you, to kind of take in everything going on around you, and to nurture these things. I mean, you talk about, if that's a plant, you've got no better sunlight, water, soil, and fertilizer for these things being put into that environment, despite the job, just because of the things you get to see and hear. Were you going to school for that specifically, or was this kind of the moment that nurtured the idea? Because there's so many people that didn't necessarily know they wanted to be a creative, but they got in that environment for a little while, and suddenly, or a couple of years later, they are a writer. They are these creatives. And is that what happened to you?
I always knew I wanted to be a writer since I was like 5, but I wanted to be a literary writer, like a novelist.
Okay.
And then when I was at NYU, I wanted to be a playwright. And that's kind of how I started. I did not know until I got to the Letterman show. This is how naive I was. I didn't realize TV shows were written. So I really had no idea. It's not like I thought, oh, I think the actors make up the lines. I never even thought about it. So
let's cut you some slack. You were 19. Okay, so we'll cut.
I didn't have an opinion, and I had grown up, like I said, in the South, cut off from all this world. But I knew I wanted to be a writer. And then when I got to the show, I was like, oh, there's television writers. What an interesting thing. And then I actually remembered that because Happy Days was very popular when I was growing up, and Gary Marshall would have his Happy Days cast and crew play baseball together. And Dave, the Letterman show back then, actually had a baseball team.
A pretty serious one at that too, right? Like Jeff Martin talked about that, and everybody had some game. You guys took it pretty seriously.
A game, and I am not athletic in that regard. But it was, again, this was part of my dream come true. It's like I played softball with the Letterman team in Central Park. And that paralleled the Happy Days thing that I knew from earlier, where the writers would like play. So this was kind of, then I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to be a TV writer, like, you know, and so that's what first kind of opened that up. And then later on, when I had been there for a while, Dave started putting the intros, you know, the show would open, the old NBC show would open with like live or like from New York. And then like a man who blah, blah, blah. And that was the intro. And so I started writing those intros.
You started writing Bill's copy for the intro for the show. That's very cool. Do you remember any that come off the top of your head that you remember getting on?
I remember just one, because I've been trying to remember and I can't. But the one that I was proud of was, so I wrote one that was like, from New York, transfers available, because it was like, that's what they used to say on the, I mean, I haven't been on the subway in a while. That's what they used to say on the subway, you know, transfers available to get to the next stop on the New York subway. And so, he thought that was funny. And so that was actually the very first thing I ever got on the air ever in my life. So, and that was a big kick, because it was not only nationwide, it was like all over the place in terms of his show. And the show was the height of popularity. And it really gave me a kick that it was such a great kind of high that, you know, you could write something at 2:00 in the afternoon and get it on that night.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that is beyond special. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because you know, we live at the current time of this recording, it's 2023. And I mean, obviously, you know, life is in this time frame extremely different than it was back then. Right, and when you talk about the height of popularity, this late night was a movement, and it was a movement that was started, like you think about Facebook, right? And Facebook is something that it's a worldwide phenomenon. Everybody has it, but where did it start? It started with the college kids. It started with people who are up and coming, who were on the cusp of pop culture and what's new and exciting and whatnot. I think Facebook and the if you watch The Social Network and how it started on these college campuses and moved to college campuses, I think it's a very good modern parallel for what late night was back then. Late night was like a secret that every college kid from every college dorm had, that could literally transfer for any university in North America. That's what late night was. All the kids would stay up. Substances may or may not have been involved, and they would watch late night, and it was SNL, something very similar, but it was again a bit more of a previous generation. Late night was where the cool kids were. It was where the cool bands wanted to be.
Absolutely.
A lot of the cool actors or comedians of the day wanted to go to late night. You were there as a college student.
Yeah.
Getting to be there, and you got to put shit on the air as Dave's assistant. And this is the part that I love, the collaboration. There are so many people, no matter what they did for that show, that got stuff on that show. Oh, yeah. Was it like a drug? Like, you're Dave's assistant, you get transfers available on the screen. There's probably no feeling like it. Is that kind of what it was? And did that kind of get that bug going in you?
Well, so what was, I mean, that was like, oh, maybe I can be a writer. It gave me confidence. But what was really more of a drug was when they would put you physically on. And I had no desire to be an actress, like, ever. I don't actually like being in front of the camera.
Could have fooled me. You're doing great right now.
Oh, thank you. But in terms of, like, I could never read lines or memorize lines. Yeah. I have a story about that. If we get to the SNL stuff, I'll tell you. Oh,
and we will. And we will.
I blew it bad one time there.
Awesome.
But that was more of a high, because I remember, like I said, I had like 3 roommates down in the village, and I would get dressed for work in the morning, and I would be throwing clothes around, and they would just be like, "What's your problem? Just get dressed." And I'm like, I don't, it's like this thing. It's like, I could go to work, but I could end, maybe I'll be on TV later today. Yeah. Maybe I'll be on national television later today. And you never knew. And so it would make me anxious. And so, but in a good way, like, it was, so, because honestly, you go to work in the morning, by the end of the day, you could be on national television, who would know, and you had no idea. And that was really kind of fun. So that was more of a kick, kind of, when, there would be a sketch and they would say, do you want to play blah, blah, blah? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Now I got cut from everything, and I don't think that was a reflection on me. It's just for bad timing or whatever sketch I happened to be in did not work, and they would get rid of it. So I never really, but I almost made it on the air, like, more than a few times. And so that was, that would be like the most fun thing.
Well, and the nervousness, like, I mean, okay, we've talked a lot on this show, and you're just, building the mythos here and confirming the bar was so high for material. And I mean, I talk to Walter about this sometimes, like, and I talk to Shecky about it. All the things, the tonnage of footage of things that got cut were gold. They just weren't as maybe big of a nugget as necessary to actually make it on the air. The bar was so high. Again, you're thrust into this environment at 19 where, I mean, we're not just putting anything on. In fact, 9 out of 10 things are going to be rejected. Yep. And I mean, we've talked a lot to writers about that. But at the same time, you're in your formative years. The neuroplasticity is very, very sticky still. And you're seeing that the bar is high. That being said, if you've ever been in a studio environment where cameras are on you and all of that stuff, the nervousness doesn't go away knowing that, oh, this probably won't make the air. No, you're still just as freaked out about that kind of crap.
Actually, let me interject there.
Yes, please do.
No. So for me, it was more anticipatory anxiety, because there was, and this is an interesting statement, but I felt so 100% comfortable on stage with Dave, because you knew he would take care of everything. You didn't have to do anything. The level of confidence was so strong that even if you were in front of a studio audience and cameras and everything, and knew that it was going to be like, national / worldwide TV, I had zero nervousness when I was actually doing it. Anything.
You're kidding.
No, because I knew that no matter how badly I could possibly mess up, he would fix it. The
Wow.
confidence level was 100%. And so it was, so I never had any nervousness when I was there with him doing something like that Batgirl sketch that that I think you've seen. And so
Yeah.
no nervousness at all. My nervousness was all like I think my nervousness was all going to the office every day. I was nervous that, like, every single day I was like getting ready to go to work. And then once I got to work, I was fine.
Was
So
there any routine to it, Jill, or was it a new adventure every day?
it was very, very structured, but within the structure there was it's like you never knew what was going to happen. So but very structured. I mean, the show taped every day at like 5:30 or 5.
Right.
I can't even remember now. And I would leave for work the exact same time every day. Dave would leave at the time. He was living in New Canaan, Connecticut. He would drive in every day. Same time every day. I really worked from like 10 in the morning till 10 at night. And that was my schedule, 5 days a week. So everything in that regard, a TV show is very, very structured. The rehearsal would be at the exact same time. The players would change. Like, obviously there'd be different musical guests, different celebrities coming in, but the structure was very rigid, as all TV shows, because I worked on other TV shows too, as all TV shows are. But within that, there was a lot of like just intense fun, and you never knew what was going to happen up in those offices. So that part was the kind of open-ended, I mean, it was the most concentrated fun time I've had in my life. It was hilariously fun.
I love this so much. Let's get into the Dave's assistant. I want to talk a little bit about Lori, because I mean, legendary, like you say, on camera, we all saw Lori so much. And I've heard how good of a dancer she is, and how Lori is a personality unto herself, and I want to talk about that a little bit. But I want to talk about one of the things that I've heard is that if you were one of Dave's assistants in any way, you had to make sure you knew how to drive his cars. Did you have to drive Dave's cars very much?
So, a funny story. So he sent me once, I don't know where, somewhere upstate New York, to get his Lamborghini.
Oh my God, because there's a learning curve to driving a Lamborghini. That is crazy.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't even drive a stick. I couldn't even drive a stick. I didn't know
Was
how.
it a countach?
I don't even know what that means.
Oh, was it the one where the door goes up? The door lifts up in the air?
Oh, how interesting. I don't remember. I do remember it was yellow. It was bright yellow, like Yellow Jacket yellow.
Hold on one thing. My power cord just slipped out of my laptop, and I cannot lose this. I'm so fascinated by this. One sec here.
No problem.
There we go. I'm better now.
Okay, good.
Okay, it was a yellow Lamborghini.
So, and he sends me up there it was at the dealer getting fixed or something. I don't remember the details, but he sends me up there, and it's a long way. Like, I'm in the, whatever, a hired car or whatever. I go up there. It was like an hour, maybe hour and a half drive. I get there, and only then do I tell him I can't drive not only can't not drive a stick. I mean, a Lamborghini, I believe from my knowledge, is even different, even more different in terms of that. But so I tell him while I'm there.
Funny aside to this, I don't know if you've watched the Casey episode yet, but
I only watched part of it, but I intend to watch the rest of it.
One of her first questions was, "Can you drive stick?"
That's so fun. She came after me, so
yeah, that's what I'm saying. She came like I think right after you. So
set the curve, and so anyway, so I'm like, what the hell are you doing up there then? Why didn't you speak up? And I'm like, I don't know. I think, he had sent me up here to get luggage or something. Like, it wasn't clear that when I was going up there to get the car, I thought I was going up there to get the luggage that came with the car or something like that. But anyway, that's what happened. So to this day, I can't drive a manual car. And so he sent me back, and then he sent my friend Andy Carson, who was Paul Schaefer's intern at the time, to go up there and get the car. So maybe you'll have him on. You can ask him.
Oh yeah, let's set that up. You bring up a good question that I was going to ask, because it's an interesting place being, being in the inner circle. A very interesting place, because you're talking about sensitive information. You're talking about how in some ways the job simply requires you to be separated a little bit from the rest of the staff, where there is camaraderie, where there is these things. You're 19. That being said, you're 19 and you're at the epicenter of something that you wanted to do. Did you bond with a lot of the people around you and a lot of the rest of the staff? Like, did you become friends with these people, or because of the nature of the job, did you have to stay within the inner circle?
Sure. So I stayed within the inner circle.
Yeah.
I became, but I mean, I did become friendly with like Paul Sims at the time was a writer, Spike Ferrison, they became friends. Daniel
Wow.
Kellison on the talent side became a friend. Basically, I became, and Andy Carson, who was Paul's assistant, became a friend. So basically, I became friends with the younger people on the staff. So Paul, I think, was right out of college. Spike was like a year older than me. Daniel was like 2 years older than me. So it was like an age grouping thing. But for the most part, like literally that was like 3% of my time. And
Yep.
then 97% of my time was really me, Lori, Dave in his office. And then Morty would come in and Steve O'Donnell would come in. And that was my entire world. Like nobody, I didn't interact really with anybody else on a friendly level, just because I had no time. My focus was in that world, and it was sequestered. And people came into the cave, kind of like, that's how I think about it. It was like a cave. People came into the cave, which was Dave's office, and I hardly ever left that area of the office of the building, unless I was following Dave like down to the studio. Or I mean, I would go everywhere with him. If he went to any meeting, I just went with him all the time, wherever he went. I had full access.
It totally makes sense. We had a locally about 10 years ago, we had a forest fire around us, and it was a firestorm. And one of the things that the newscasters educated the public about while this fire was going on was, when fires get so big, at a certain point, they kind of have their own atmosphere. And in that atmosphere, that little world there is unto itself. And I liken what you're saying, very similar to that. When you are that close to someone like David Letterman at that point, it is its own atmosphere, and that is going to take up, it's kind of separated from everything else. And that makes sense. It's not a personal thing. It's not an elitist thing. It's just, there's so much fucking stuff to do that's kind of what it becomes. Now, you mentioned Paul Sims. I'm going to say this, and we might cut this out or whatever, but I'm just going to say this right now. Otherwise I'll forget, because I'm like squirrel and I've got so many things to ask you about. Paul Sims is a guy, like growing up, it's funny, you would see people's names and credits and things like that. I am such a gigantic enthusiast of news radio. I'm such a gigantic enthusiast of the Larry Sanders Show and whatnot. And I remember seeing, from a little boy, seeing Paul Sims' name here and there, and watching it show up in some of my very, very favorite things. The thing so if we can ever hook up Paul Sims being on here, I would love to puppy dog all over that guy. But here's an example of somebody who watched, who got a chance to be part of these monumental things at a young age, and then go on to become part of bigger things that were cool still along the way, and creatives. You are somebody who got a chance to do the same thing, going to SNL, going to Friends, some of the other things that you've done. Do you ever reflect back on those days and are just like, holy cow, I can't believe I got to be a part of that?
I just think that was really fun. Like, that's kind of what I think. It's almost like, going to summer camp, that was really fun. Or going to Hawaii, that was really fun. So they're just like compartmentalized segments of my life. And I'm like, oh, that was a great time. That was a fun time. But I've had many, many fun, great times. So it's like a chapter of a book that was like totally fun.
Yeah.
I had so much fun every single day.
Those of us who live vicarious and wish that we would have become that intern and had a career bud around us and grow. And there are so many examples of that. Many of them have been on this show already. There are many more to come. We are delighted to hear that, because we hope that's what it's like. Insane amounts of work. Yes. Is there stress and pressure and a high standard put on everybody because of the high standard Dave puts on himself that floats down? Yes. Understood, but the idea that in that chaos is also a tremendous amount of laughter, a tremendous amount of fun, that kind of a thing. I'm so grateful to hear that. I'm vicariously grateful that you are so grateful and you think of it that way. Did you see a lot of hijinks in the office? You know, you hear the stories, the big public ones, Dave throwing the baseball through the window down to the down to the street of 30 Rock. Mary throwing footballs, Mary and Dave throwing footballs into the garbage can.
Mary Connolly throwing footballs, absolutely. But no, I mean, I have a hilarious story. So, I mean, Dave, you know, it's not like he was bored. It was like he was in the office and he was waiting for Morty to come in or Steve O'Donnell to come in. There was a lot of waiting going on. So he's just naturally creative. So he would just play around and do stuff. And we had Chinese food one night, and it wasn't around the 4th of July. So I don't know why in the world we had sparklers, you know, the kind. Oh
God, here we go. Yep.
And so for some reason we had sparklers in the office, and we get the Chinese food, and the Chinese food was bad. For whatever reason that night, the place we got was like bleh, greasy, yucky Chinese food. No one wanted to eat it. And so Dave, you know, almost like a little kid, it's like he has the sparklers. So he starts sticking the sparklers inside the egg rolls that we didn't eat. Awesome. And so he sticks the sparklers in the egg rolls, and he has a lot of them, like 10 going at the same time. We think it's hilarious. It's really just me, Lori, Diamond, maybe Jude Brennan in the office. That's it.
Yep.
And the fire alarm goes off.
Awesome.
From these egg rolls that have now kind of caught on fire from the sparklers he stuffed inside them. And we're in his office. And so the NBC, I don't know if it was the NBC fire department, or I guess it was the New York City fire department. The fire department comes. And Dave, you know, they're like, what's going on? They're like, oh, it's just, you know, this is blah, blah, blah. This is what happened. And Dave said, she did it. And I thought he was kidding, and I laugh. And Dave was like, no, she did it. She did it. You got it. He was kidding, of course, but he did it in such a deadpan way that the firemen were starting to believe it was me. And so that was really funny. And then there was another time. Oh, and he did talk about the egg roll incident on air. So there's a clip somewhere. I'm sure like Don Geller has.
We'll get Don. Well, yeah, we'll get Don to.
There's a clip somewhere from like, you know, that would have been 91, where he talks about the egg rolls and the fire department. So there was another time, you know, people would send him stuff in the office, and part of my job was to open his mail. Yep. And for whatever reason, we got a giant wheel of like cheddar cheese. I don't know who sent it.
A wheel of cheese. That's a perfect gift. That sounds like a perfect Letterman gift, actually.
It was giant. I mean, these cheddar cheese, I mean, I don't know how much they weigh, but they're big. And so Dave doesn't want the cheese, and Spike, for whatever reason, Spike Ferrison's in the room with me, and he's like, let's put the cheese on 6th Avenue. And we can't put the cheese on 6th Avenue. We're going to cause an accident. It's a giant wheel of cheese. And Spike's like, yeah, let's do it. And so Dave kind of overheard or whatever, and he's like, you're going to do it. And he was egging us on to go put the cheese on 6th Avenue, the cheese wheel. And I don't want any part of it, because I think a bus is going to hit it and cause accidents and people. So, but for whatever reason, you know, Spike puts the cheese on 6th Avenue, and a bus does come along and smushes the cheese. So you know, mathematically, the bus is bigger than the cheese.
Yes, the bus will win.
All this from like the 14th floor window. And what was hilarious, it's like none of this was filmed. This was just how we amused ourselves in the office. So we thought it was hilariously funny to see the bus squish. I mean, because the cheese went everywhere.
Yeah.
And we thought it was incredibly funny, but there's no cameras rolling. There's no nothing. Now there's just cheese all over 6th Avenue. So we got a kick out of that. And Dave got a kick out of that. And that's kind of the stuff we would do in the office. So yeah, just kind of naturally play. We would, because we get a lot of gifts. Some of them were bizarro, and we would just play with the toys. That's kind of what would happen.
Well, and what we see on screen is we had always hoped, obviously, as the viewing audience, that what we're seeing on screen is a reflection of things that actually went on, and
Yes, and
you're
it's
just
true.
kind of confirming
It's
that.
true. Yeah.
And that makes me so happy because it's organic, it's not manufactured, which is how it felt. You know, we've talked about this with talking about Meryl. One of the things that Meryl liked to do to Dave early on was prank the host and do things that that were surprises to him, which he of course loathed. Cut that out early on, but the spirit of that continued because you guys created an art out of making an interruption that seemed unplanned. It was totally planned, but it seemed unplanned. It seemed spontaneous.
Course, right.
And this is a good example of how spontaneity was a part of the day-to-day life of you know, in the walls of late night. I appreciate this story so much. You talk about one of your duties was to answer Dave's mail. I got to ask this question. Did you ever open a piece of mail from the gal, you know, who we're talking about here? You know, did you ever open up a piece of mail from the gal who ended up in Dave's house?
You know, I opened a lot of weird mail, so women would send him like pictures and weirdness and stuff. And
back in a time where that was not the easiest thing in the world to do, there were no digital cameras and things like that back then, and photomats and all
and
that.
there was also no security to screen the mail. I mean, it was many years later, but there was like a what was it? Anthrax scare at NBC with the news department.
Yes.
And I'm like, I saw that years later, and I was like, oh, you know, thank goodness I like, I'm not there then. So we would, you know, I didn't pay any, and we would just toss the mail, like any crazy, and if it was crazy, it went in the trash.
Okay. So it wasn't your job to build files on some of these people.
There were files on some of the people. So very early on, Lori would say, we would check the audience for, there were one or two, you know, stalkers like the woman you're mentioning. And so Lori very early on would say, before, as the studio audience would load in, she would say, go down there and check for, you know, any of the crazies. And you're
19.
No.
You're 19 looking at like, okay, go and give a once over on the audience. Did you ever find anything?
Well, I didn't do it. So I said, I'm not doing that. I'm like, you know, I'm not doing that. And so I said, absolutely not. I don't want to be confronted with a crazy person. I don't even want to see a crazy person. So I just said no. And and like, what do you mean no? How can you say no? And I'm like, I'm saying no. And you know, and so they got somebody else. I don't even know who they got, but I didn't do it. So I didn't even do it one day. It's like, I'm not looking for crazy people. No.
Well, there's that famous story. I don't know if you were there at the time, but or if you've heard this story, but there's that famous story about, or semi-famous within the Letterman enthusiast community. We've heard it, where somebody had a briefcase and they came up and they just went and sat beside Dave at the desk, and they had a briefcase, and it was like a few very tense moments.
Oh, that's
and then
scary.
Security had ejected that person.
That's
but
scary. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, but also at the time, that's how big late night was.
When you get that, yeah, exactly. It was huge, and it was a different time when, you know, that, so that was
day-to-day stuff. Okay, so we passed the mail. Did you answer the phone? I gotta ask, did Altman ever call? Did you hear any fun voices? Did you get to it's fun experiences answering the phone, being the gatekeeper for Lori, which is a significant gatekeeper for Dave? You were Dave's gatekeeper. Anything fun with people calling?
I mean, I have to say, I do remember Johnny Carson.
There you go.
Yeah, that's the one that sticks in my mind. And I can't remember, sometimes it would be Dave saying, you know, get Johnny on the phone. And then I'd have to call Johnny Carson's assistant. And then, you know, okay, is he on the line? He's on the line. Let me put Dave on, that kind of thing. A lot of handling the phone. But I do remember Johnny calling on his own, you know, just sometimes without the assistant intervening, and I would pick up the phone. Dave had a private line to his office. So once it went through the reception, it would just go straight to his office. I even had a private line that didn't even go through reception. It was just his private number. So that's what I answered.
Johnny ever make you laugh?
Excuse me?
Johnny ever make you laugh?
Oh, Johnny, no, he was just formal, but I got a kick out of knowing I was talking to him. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about it, you know, 30 something years later or 20 something years later, whatever it is. And I'm getting a kick out of it vicariously that you got a chance that voice. There's no voice
Yeah.
kind of
I
like
just
him. I mean,
got a
unless
kick
it's
out of
Dana
that.
Carvey or Rich Little doing it or whatever. But
Right.
like, that's the thing. His voice is so famous. It became a caricature for some of the most famous impressionists of our day. So many people, even to this day, do a Carson, and you got a chance to talk to him. Did Altman ever call? Do you remember Altman ever calling?
Yeah, I do remember him calling, but you know, he was always very close to Dave in terms of being friends. You know, nothing, we didn't chit chat or anything. Like, it
Okay,
was
so you didn't hear Creepy Baby or any of that stuff.
I didn't hear any of that. It was just like, Jeff's on the line, you know, his lawyer would call a lot. Like, it was, you know, in terms of, I'm sure other, you know, he didn't really interact with the celebrities after hours. Like, it was, so they wouldn't call. You know, it was really the lawyer calling, and I can't remember, aside from Johnny Carson, I'm sure there were others. I just, it didn't register, because again, my focus was on Dave. I could care less what was going on in pop culture around me. So which is what you were hired to do. You were hired to be that person that kind of did have those blinders on. I know, but I had them on naturally. So
okay. And unpaid the whole time, right?
I was unpaid the whole time. It's true.
So like a very directed intern, a very specific intern, if you want to call it that, almost, like, because it's as opposed to doing general duties and trying to find yourself or whatever, you had it zeroed in. Obviously, you know, all the fun, softball, all these things, but you're also 19, 20, 21. You're getting to the point now where it's like, okay, I got to figure out a way to continue my existence here in New York. I want to stay in the city. Did you ever talk to anybody about, like, obviously you moved on to SNL, the paid position. We're going to get to that, you know, for sure. But did you make overtures to anybody saying, hey, I'm going to have to start making a living here to be able to live in the city here. Is there a place for me?
No.
Okay.
I just wanted this, you know, I would have been Dave's assistant like forever. My parents were a little concerned about that. They were like, you know, we didn't send you to college to be a secretary. What are you doing? I'm like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
But in a way they did. They wanted me to have, you know, my own voice versus somebody else, versus assisting someone else's voice, which I actually think is, you know, was an important statement that I didn't appreciate back then. But I knew I wanted to be a writer. I would inquire, like, how do you become a writer? Like, I would ask Steve O'Donnell, and, you know, basically they would say, you put together a package and of writing with samples and let me look at it. You know, so I did do that twice, I remember. And then I kind of, you know, just by having other writer friends like Paul Sims and stuff, it's like, oh, you need an agent, and how do you get an agent? And I kind of figured that out just organically over the years, just by being around other writers. I kind of figured out. I was always it's like, in my mind, I was going to be Dave's assistant forever until I became a writer, and that was just what it was. And you know, I didn't have much thought beyond that. Like, that's just what I was going to do. So
no. And again, that's kind of blissfully, naively organized. When you think about it, at the age that you were, there is whimsy. You're still got that youth, that beautiful energy of youth with you. That makes a lot of sense. But again, to parents, that doesn't make a lot of sense so much. It's not.
They were very concerned. You know, that I left school to go be an assistant to, you know, pop culture. Basically, you know, my parents were both like intellectuals, and so they're just like, what, television? What do you want to do that for? And it's so they had a different viewpoint.
Oh, that's adorable.
And also, by the way, I was financing all of this with student loans. So in retrospect,
but what a time. But what a time.
Like, and so I literally, that's why, so like, I know we'll get to, but like, I enrolled at NYU while I was at SNL, because it gave me the ability to get student loans to pay for my New York City apartment, so I can afford an apartment while working at Saturday Night Live. Because even though I was paid at SNL, it wasn't enough money to afford an apartment on the Upper West Side. So I just like was conniving and manipulating the puzzle pieces to try to, because this was going to work no matter what. That's what I decided. Like, this is going to work. I just got to figure out how to move the pieces around. So that's what
Jill,
happened.
like a guy from Western Canada, but New York, obviously, New York is, like I said, for some people, many people, New York is a magnet. It has a majesty to it, it has a magic to it, and it does. Every time I go there, I still feel the same way. The city is alive. It has a pulse. It's this thing. Sinatra sang about it decades ago. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. New York has this pulse, this magic, this creative juice to it. What you're describing, I think a lot of folks would be able to identify with and go, oh my God, if I could chase dreams the way that you're talking about this, I would do anything to do it.
Yeah.
You think about you as a 19-year-old versus 19-year-olds now who doing what you're talking about. Again, they're adding probably one, maybe 2 zeros to the student loans you're talking about, the numbers and the things like that. You got to do this at a very, very special time period. I don't know that 19-year-olds now could ever do what you did. I do want to get to these other things, but at the end of the day, also, I think it's important that we talk about we just had Craig Thomas on here, who was a writer for Letterman later on, way after you. He was over at the CBS years, but then went on to create How I Met Your Mother. But a writer, of course, a writer. And he talks about how, it's very similar generation. He, as a writer, had a chance to have this gift nurtured, and he had a place where it could incubate and become a writer. And right now, at the time of this recording, there's a writer strike going on. We seem to have them every decade.
I've been picketing. Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to be in New York in a couple of weeks here, and I'm going to picket with you guys and gals, because it's so important. It's being stunted. The idea of what you do in this creative outlet that you do, economically, back then you could kind of swing it, you could figure out ways to make it happen so you could nurture the creativity, but now it's becoming really, really hard to do that, and the industry itself is making it even harder for writers, young writers, to come into this thing and to see that there is a through line of some sort, a career of some sort. I hear the gratefulness in you, but let's talk a little bit about the importance of writers and the importance of what it is that's being talked about during this work stoppage.
Yeah, I mean, what I can say about that is I have been out picketing in New York, and basically it's about the contracts. It's about just getting fair pay for the time. And I don't want to say too much about it because I'm 100% supportive, but I don't want to basically say something the Guild doesn't want me to say.
I feel you. Yep. Yep.
I don't know the points that need to be out there at that level.
Yeah.
It's about AI. It's about just really getting better working conditions. So because the industry has shifted to making writers more of like short-term gig workers versus having a very, very sustainable, career with money that is stable enough to have a life and a family in a very expensive, cities, LA and New York. And so that's what has changed with streaming, as on top of just the unjust behavior in terms of, it's the same with just music artists, with how corporations should not be getting the lion's share of the benefit from creative work, and how do we kind of right the wrong. So those are really the important points of the strike, and that's pretty much probably all I should and want to kind of say about that.
You're so on brand. I can't say very much or whatever, and then you go on to make an articulate, beautiful statement that is just yes. 100% yes. Writing should not be a side gig, and I don't have to worry about that. I'm not in the Guild, so I don't have to worry about. I'm just an enthusiastic supporter, of course, of everything. So writing shouldn't have to be a side gig for somebody where they're working a job and they have to write on the side because they can't afford it.
Right. It's a professional. It's a profession. It's and it really the people who should benefit should be the writers themselves, the directors themselves, the actors themselves, not a corporate entity. So the media conglomerates need to work that out, and the streaming services and all of that. So that's
Absolutely. And I'm glad that this work stoppage right now is happening at the infancy of AI. AI is just starting to stretch its legs and whatnot. And we know, so if we can get another decade or so where people can be incubated in their creativity and be able to do this, the next time we'll figure out the next time, because things are everything's going to change again.
Right.
But if we can do that, that'll be a good day's work for the next generation. So this is great that we're talking about this now. Okay, obviously I'm going to ask you to come back. We'll curate a few stories, because you and I mean, we've talked privately. There's lots of little stories that we can talk about before we move on to SNL. Are you okay for time? Can we move on to SNL? Are we still good for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Jill, you rock. I love this so much. I'm having so much fun. Okay, so Batgirl. When did Batgirl happen? And how did Batgirl happen?
So this is a hilarious story. So I won tickets to a Circle Line cruise around Manhattan on Halloween night by calling into a radio station because I was bored. So there was a radio station on in the office. Dave liked to listen to like classic rock in the office.
Okay.
When he was just hanging out in the office, and we were listening to some kind of classic rock station. And it was at the time, I don't even know if they still do this, because now I just listen to my phone, playlist on my phone. But at the time, the DJs would have like, call in, win tickets, blah, blah, blah.
They still do that.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm a little out of the pop
culture. We're
world.
not that old yet.
Okay. So Dave's like, call in. And I'm like, okay.
No kidding.
So I call in and I win. And I'm like, how like bizarro is that to be, it's like I already feel like I'm winning. I'm like sitting in Dave's office. It's the inner circle. We're hanging out at night. And I just won from calling in randomly to a radio show. It just,
were you on the air?
I guess I was. Yeah, I guess I don't even remember, but I must have been.
Let's take that apart for a second. The guy who would go on to become the greatest broadcaster in history, interacting with other broadcasters who would freak out if they understood who just won this contest. And of course they don't know. Isn't that funny? They don't even
know who's sitting right next to me on the couch.
Exactly.
So anyway, so I win this Circle Line cruise around Manhattan for two that's going to be hosted by Adam West, who used to play Batman.
Oh my God.
And it's a Halloween cruise. It's on Halloween. And so,
he must have loved that. Dave must have loved that.
He did. Yeah. And so obviously, and it was the Circle Line. It was like the next day. Like this was like the day before Halloween. It was like the next day. And so I win the tickets, and it's like, okay, who am I going to go with? And I asked Dave to go with me just because I had no friends. My friends were everyone in the inner circle. I had no other friends. He obviously, I knew he wouldn't be able to go. So I ended up going with Paul Schaefer's intern, Andy Carson. So this was, you asked about the costume. So basically the next day, which was Halloween morning, I needed a costume. It was a masquerade Circle Line cruise, and I had no costume. And it wasn't a CVS, because I don't think they had those drugstores at the time, but there was some drugstore in the lobby of 30 Rock that sold very, very cheap costumes, like really like $5 costumes. Yep. And so I went down there knowing I would have to wear something on the Circle Line cruise that night, and I bought a $5 bat suit. So I bring it back up to the office, and Dave's like, "What do you got there? What do you have? What's in the bag?" And I'm like, "I have to go on this cruise." And he's like, "Let's see it. Put it on." And so I put it on, and he thinks this is fantastic.
Yep.
And so then and then we were filming a remote. At the time, we filmed remotes on Monday. And I don't remember I think the remote was a cast talent show, and everyone had to show a talent. And he's like, "Put the costume on. That's your talent. You're going to be Batgirl." And so I did. And that clip, was hilarious, and it was like for Halloween, and I ended up going on the Circle Line cruise wearing my Batgirl costume. But that he loved the fact that I bought this cheapo costume for literally like $5 in the pharmacy downstairs. And it's I have other pictures. I have pictures of Barbara Gaines wearing the Batgirl suit in the office. I have pictures of Paul Sims wearing the Batgirl suit. We passed around the Batgirl suit that day. And everyone has a photo of them wearing the Batgirl suit. So, but my clip, of course, made it it was filmed. So
God damn it. I knew I should have saved that story for the end. That's okay. We'll come up with something else. That's fantastic. A couple questions. Did Andy dress up that night?
Andy was a cow, and I have an excellent picture of him in a cow costume. So he was great. It was Batgirl and a cow, and we went on the cruise. We went on the masquerade ball. It was fun.
Before we leave Letterman and go to SNL for a little while here, did you, last question, and this may be just completely irrelevant, which sounds about right for me and my skill level of doing this. Did you ever see the pickle? Do you know what I'm talking about?
The giant pickle. Yes, absolutely.
You did. Oh, there we go. You saw it?
Well, not only did I see it, when going back to where we started, where I made the comment about in the office with Lori Diamond about at least you have condiments. It was because the giant pickle was in Dave's office, and that's what I was looking at.
Shut up.
That's the story. So that's,
oh my God.
Yeah. When I said it, that the giant pickle was in the corner of the office at the time. And that's what I was referring to.
Folks, I swear to God, we didn't pre-interview this. I've got a couple of calls in to see if I can get up into the Seth offices. It's going to be tougher now with I want a picture with the pickle. Like, I think that would be
up there. I didn't know the pickle's still there.
It went from late night.
That's funny.
Late night with Conan O'Brien to late night with Jimmy Fallon to late night with Seth Meyers. It's apparently funny. In the offices there still. So
I had no idea. So the pickle.
There we go.
The pickle got me the job. That's the pickle is what happened. The giant pickle.
I swear please confirm we did not talk about this beforehand. I swear to God.
We absolutely did not. We absolutely did not. And by the way, just to, before we move off of late night, I mean, there's so many stories still with just late night.
And you're coming back to tell some of them. Okay.
I will tell one that is just, so I mean, Dave liked to, he just liked to play around with people. And one of the most nerve-wracking jobs for me where I had to escort him to the dressing rooms on the 6th floor before every show. So our offices were on the 14th floor.
Yep.
And my job was to ride with him in the elevator down to the 6th floor and basically stand outside his dressing room door while he was getting ready for the show. And then be the point person outside the dressing room and the makeup room if he needed anything. Yep. And so every day, this was like my alone time with Dave, where I had to be in the elevator alone with him. And I would get so socially anxious. Just about, even I was alone with him all the time, but it was the fact that it was this contained environment.
Yep.
And 30 Rock is a big building. It could go, that elevator ride became very long at times. And he loved the fact he liked to make me anxious just because it would be something to play with, so and that was early on. I lost the anxiousness as time went on and got more comfortable with him. But this elevator ride became like, the 7th circle of hell for me. It was like I was so nervous every day about getting in the elevator and like, what were we going to talk about? And what is the, it just became this anxiety fest in my head. But then people would get on the elevator and he would then kind of play with the people who would get on. And so this elevator ride just became just so funny every single day. And sometimes he would talk about it on the air too. So there were some clips about Dave talking about, who was in the elevator or what happened in the elevator and stuff.
On the way down to the studio today or something like that.
Yes, exactly. And that would happen. But I forget the point of telling you the story. I'm so sorry. But
are you kidding me? There is no point. Just like this show. No, we revel in these things. These are the things that we love to talk about and hear about. Yeah. I'm already presupposing you're going to come back and you and I will curate a couple anecdotes and things like that. The first episode when I have people on is so great But we've already had experience, even in the short lifespan of this show, where people come on the second time and even the third time, where rapport has been established, which is what we're doing today. And then next time we can just jump into it and play with whatever stories we want to talk about. And I just certainly feel it right now. But I do want to give our audience, the idea that it's so funny how for some people, early Letterman was the zenith of their careers, because they, just because of the fact of age and time frame and all that. But then you've got these people who started young and they ended up, like Paul Simms is a good example of that. And they went on to do some other things. And then you've got the example later on of people who were kind of, young when they started on Late Show. And now they're doing things outside of, because the production has ended, and I'm fascinated by the different evolutionary tracks of people, who worked for David Letterman and company. You now went from late night to my generations. Like, people always ask about SNL, the quote, I think Lauren once said this, might have been on Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, but don't quote me on that. Said that most people's SNL cast, their cast was the cast that they had when they were in high school. My cast was the cast that you got to work with when you moved on from late night to SNL. I'm super curious, because Sandler and all these people have talked about how they would take the elevator up when Dave was recording, and they would watch him and they would have reverence for him. And they're like, oh, we're on the coolest show on TV. Nope. That's the coolest guy on TV right there. And they would come and sneak in to watch it. You basically left late night, went to SNL. Yeah. How did that happen? And when you went to SNL, what was your role?
Sure. So I was one of the writer's assistants initially.
Paid gig, right?
Excuse me, what?
Paid gig? It was a paid deal?
It was a paid gig. So it was, I'm trying to remember. Lori Jo Hofstra was one of the main writing assistants, and then Tara, and I unfortunately can't remember her last name, was Jim Downey's assistant, who was the head writer at the time. And then they brought me on to be now I can't even remember what it's called, the extra writer's assistant, because when they had the read through on one of the nights, but I think it was Tuesday night, Wednesday night, I've forgotten everything.
Yeah. No, that's okay.
They would bring another, so I was the third writer's assistant for that specific read through night. And that was kind of my job. And now I forgot the question you asked.
No, that's okay. So you basically, you're working there for free. SNL is here. Is this a job that gets posted and you post into it? It's interrelational.
So obviously at the time, it's all in the same building. It's all in 30 Rock. A lot of the crew members are the same. So I knew a lot of people. I mean, we're on the 14th floor and the 6th floor. SNL was on the 20-something floor, I think the 27th floor and the 8th floor, right? Were the studio floors, and so there's a lot of crossover with crew members and stuff, right? And so I knew the people on SNL just from being in the building, and so when I moved over there, this is not an advertised job. Like, this is like, and so I did go in an interview, I remember, and I got the job immediately because they already knew who I was. Because what I didn't realize was everyone in the building knew who I was, because I was with Dave 24/7. I mean, they knew me. I didn't even realize I had such blinders on. I didn't realize that everybody knew me because of him. And so when I show up, I'm naively like, hi, I'm Jill Bayor. And they're like, we know who you are. And I just had no idea. I was living in such a, narrow kind of focus. So it was a very easy segue to go over to SNL. And I did not get paid at the Letterman show because I was quote unquote an intern. But at SNL, I got paid. And so for me, living in New York City, that was a no-brainer. It's like, I gotta go because I
You got to
need
do it.
money.
Yep.
And so that's what happened there, but it was all in the same building at the same time. So
Who did you break the news to at late night, and was that a hard conversation?
I don't want to misinform anybody. I got let go from late night.
Okay.
And you might not have known that. So there was a period of time where I got let go. It was, not to dwell on anything negative, but there was some negativity with Lori Diamond, and I got let go.
Yep.
And I was adrift in New York for like months, like not having a job, not knowing what I was doing, not having money to pay for apartments. And it was just, everything spiraled. But it was a spiral of only about 3 months, because then I got the SNL job. SNL is off during the summer. So it was like a spiraling summer.
Yeah.
Where I didn't know what in the world I was doing. And then in September, I got the job like in August. And so I immediately hooked into that show. So that's what happened there.
Amazing. As a young person, it must have been a long 3 months, but at the end of the day, it certainly shows the value of putting in some work. I mean, I certainly feel that with this show here, it's the love of it. And you put in this work, and suddenly, you're adrift for 3 months, like you say, and it's a long 3 months for, that, but then you go back to this familiar place, and suddenly you realize all that work that you did paid off, and now you're back in that building again, and this time getting paid for it.
Right.
That must have felt really cool the day you got back in there.
Because in a way it was kind of like, haha, they tried to get rid of me, but they couldn't.
Oh, good for you. That's a great feeling. That's a great feeling.
By the way, that was not Dave. Like he had nothing to do with it. It was it was just the culture of how the shows worked. But I was like, haha, they didn't get rid of me. So
my cast, Carvey, Jan Hooks, who might have been gone by the time you got there. Actually, she left a little bit prematurely from that staff, but
before me, yeah.
Okay. Victoria Jackson, Dennis Miller, then of course, the transition over, Rock and Farley and Sandler and Spade, right? All these people. And you almost had two casts simultaneously kind of doing this thing. It's a very famous time in SNL history. That's when you show up there.
That's true. So when I showed up, Adam Sandler wasn't even a cast member. He had one show, or maybe it was even just the pre-show, but he had one show where he was just hired as a writer and not a cast member.
Yep.
And that's when I started. So my first day was his first day. And that's, that was September of 1991. Yeah. Yep. So that's when that happened. But I had an office on the 17th floor. That was the floor. Okay. Yeah. So it wasn't the 27th floor. Sorry. It
17.
Was
no, it's fine.
Floor.
We all know that it's Studio 8H, but
8H, right. Exactly. So we were on the 17th floor where our offices were. And so I had my office, and then Adam Sandler and Chris Farley had an offshoot office right there. And then David Spade and Chris Rock had an offshoot office right there. And then the rest of the writers had offices, like Al Franken was there. Jim Downey was the head writer. And that was
Smigel? Was Smigel there at the time?
Smigel was there, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And Conan
showed up twice during that year.
Yeah.
So he was only there twice that I recall. And he wasn't a full-time writer. He was like, he would have pop in, and that was the first time I met him. So yeah.
Wow.
And I even have a picture. I have a photo of the whole cast and crew, and Conan's in the back. He's the tallest. You could see him. But before, nobody knew who he was. He was just out of Harvard, and nobody knew, and that was what that was.
I cannot. There is no minimizing of this experience here. We were talking about atmospheres earlier. You were at the epicenter of comedy history. And you got to see a lot of these things, and writer's assistant, don't worry. There is no minimizing of this. I don't care if somebody's a janitor in those studios, in those offices at that time, whatever. We're not minimizing anybody. because this is, you know, and I just, again, you're so good at self-deprecation and kind of minimizing things. Jill, this is amazing that you got to see this shit. Like, this is crazy. Where were you? Okay, for example, where were you during broadcasts of SNL? Were you there that night, every episode?
Of course, no,
Okay.
believe me. I mean, there were times I wanted to leave because I was so tired because I worked so much. I think I might have told you this story when we weren't on the, or maybe not, but it's like, you know, I was so exhausted because we worked, the hours were crazy. And
Yep.
I just wanted to go home after the show, but you couldn't, you had to go to the party, which is the coolest party in New York City, you know, in the town. And I just wanted to go home and go to sleep.
Isn't that funny?
But I had to go. And so I was required to go. And so, but that was kind of my attitude at that point. I was just like, I just want to go to sleep. Like, that's my goal. and yet I would, you know, obviously I'd go to the parties every week. And that was, you know, I forgot.
Where were they? Did they change locations? Were they in that that legendary spot that Aykroyd used to talk about, or were they, did they change?
They would change every week. So I'm not clear which spot you're referring to. But I'm curious to know, actually, what was it?
They had okay. So, and I'm a little unclear about it, but I've heard the original cast members talk about it. There was this spot that they would all go to that was very non-suspect, or it was very you know, it was just one of those things where it was a secret, but there's the SNL cast party happening, and I'm trying to remember the location.
It might be PJ Clark's for some reason. I think that kind of hits in my head.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
But I'm not sure. Don't you know, pinpoint me on that one. But no. So when I was there, at least the party would move every week. It was a moving, floating party. And I would be so tired, I would just want to go back to my apartment. But of course I went every single week. But you know, that was quite the time. So
the guest host and the musical guest, many, if not most times, would be there.
100%. They were just like me. They had to be there. And they would want to be there. And, you know, it's a tongue-in-cheek thing with me saying I didn't want to be there. It's just,
no, I get it.
I was just tired. So,
was Michael Jordan on that year?
Michael Jordan was the first guest for the
and
first
Public Enemy. Oh, that's my
correct.
God, you were there for the Michael Jordan Public Enemy episode. Holy
so
shit.
Funny. Yeah.
Oh my
I was
God.
also there for like Bruce Springsteen, and when Sinead O'Connor did her thing with
Holy shit, you were there for that?
Madonna showed up, Barbara Streisand showed up. I mean, it was wild. It was real. Tom Petty was I loved seeing that him as a musical guest. You know, and I was just there. So back to your original question. I mean, I would be on the floor during the show. I was on the 8H floor during rehearsals and during the show. And I was on the show twice, but got cut during dress rehearsal because I couldn't swing it.
I wish that there would be a compilation of just like talking about the stuff for Letterman that got cut. I love this stuff. If there was ever, you know, any of the digital shorts, you know, later on, obviously, but dress sketches.
Yeah. So I was,
that get cut. Some of them being, you know, really, really good or subversive or whatever, but they get cut for whatever reason. I love the idea of the path not taken and some of these things. I'm fascinated by that.
I think NBC has that somewhere. And personally, I mean, you know, Don Giller's the one to ask about that, if he can get his hands on that kind of tape. Like, I mean, I was in the sketch once with Tom Hanks, and I kept blowing my lines because I was so nervous, because I never particularly liked being on camera just because I would get so nervous. And I mean, I remember the director kind of threw me out of the sketch. but it was hilarious because Tom Hanks, he didn't know I worked on the show. He thought I was an actor. And he went apart and then just got fired in front of him because I couldn't deliver my lines with Tom Hanks because I would get so nervous. So he came backstage after that and he's like, you know, you're going to go on to do other things. It'll be okay. He was so nice. And I said, oh, I'm the writer's assistant. I work on the show. And,
you know what I love about this story?
Or one of the writer's assistants, I shall say. But he thought that was so hilarious because he thought he was consoling me as an actress. And I'm like, nah, I don't do this.
The funniest thing about that, I don't know if you remember this because you're again, that you're in the eye of a hurricane, but they did I want to say it was the monologue at one time when he hosted. It was within his first 5 times for sure.
Right.
It was before the Five Timers Club, where Hanks came in, and the whole premise of the monologue was about him being a nice guy, and how he would go around and he would be like saving people and all that. People were just like, oh, he's so nice. He's so nice. And you just are confirming that with a real life story.
He was so nice. He thought he was consoling an actress who just lost her gig. And it's like, I work here.
God damn, Jill, I've got so many questions. Like, okay, so the Sinead O'Connor, like, oh God, I want to go into Public Enemy now because I'm such a big Public Enemy fan. If I would have known, I would have worn their shirt today. But were you there during the Sinead O'Connor episode?
Yes.
Okay. She was there for the good nights, and I mean, I've read many times talking about how some were shell shocked, some just went like on, life goes on. She came to the wrap party that night.
I don't remember.
Okay.
I honestly don't remember. What I do remember,
crazy.
I actually, before coming on your show, I Googled it just because I hadn't thought about it in so many years.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff on the internet is wrong, which surprised me.
No kidding. Really?
It did surprise me. I'm so naive. I'm like, that's not what happened. So, I mean, what I recall, maybe my memory's wrong, but what I recall is that during dress rehearsal, she tore up a picture of Saddam Hussein. And then obviously during the actual, she switched the pictures to the Pope.
And the song too, right?
I don't remember, so I can't comment on that. But
I think the legend is that during dress, there were like other musicians, and she had brought in extra musicians or something like that, and then made the call, or maybe it was earlier in the week or whatever. They brought in these people, paid the money and all that, and then she switched it up to go a cappella. And then it was she did a picture switch too. Right. That's interesting. But you remember it as Saddam. That's interesting.
100%. That's why, and I saw it on the internet when I Googled it the other day, just because I thought maybe we talk about it, but it's and I was like, and there were different descriptions online.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because I'm pretty clear. I mean, I have a good memory, so I wonder why there's different descriptions online which are not true, because it's like, how could something be not true on the internet?
I hope you're feeling the synergy right here, because that means you will come back and we will tell more of these stories.
Sure, absolutely.
This is like, Jill, I'm having a ball.
That's great.
Okay. And you ended up working on Friends as well.
I did. So I moved to LA, and I did work on Friends, and that was really quite interesting as well. So
the stories that are in your head.
Yeah, I have a lot of stories. My whole goal ever since the first day, I wanted to be a writer. Like, that's what I wanted to do. And so I kept getting these assistant jobs. I think just because my age, because I was on the younger side. I mean, I was 22 and younger when I had these jobs. And so, I wasn't able to kind of leverage myself to a full writer's position, but I kept getting writer's assistant positions. So, but I did work. I moved to LA. Without a job, by the way, I just moved to LA.
Now it gets cliche. Now it gets to, okay, I'm going to move to LA to seek my fortune and all that. After you have this wealth of experience, this craziness, now you do the classic stereotypical.
Exactly. And I moved to LA, and I knew nobody except my agent at the time. I had gotten a lit agent for TV. And he was my only point person. I literally knew no one in California. And I moved to LA, unknown, like had no contacts, no nothing. And I got a job on Friends as the writer's assistant. So, so a production assistant, I think, was my first title. But I was a PA on Friends, and then that became my world. And I was there every day, and I did that for a while.
How many seasons?
I was only there for one season. And
do you remember which one it was from a storyline standpoint? Were Ross and Rachel together or not together?
For some reason, I thought it was like the second to last season, but I actually Googled it last night so I could be clear. Yeah. And it wasn't. It was like the 6th season. So apparently,
Paul Rudd hadn't shown up yet.
No, and
there you go.
It's the one where
The one where anyway, sorry.
oh yeah, that's funny. It was I remember the sets in my brain, and it was where Ross had his own apartment set, and Jennifer Aniston was kind of in that set too a lot, and that's all I mean, that's my memory.
Yeah.
And then
Might have been the co-parenting thing where she had the kid, or I was about to maybe have the kid with Ross or something like that.
was
Like
the
it was
sixth season, so that
yeah.
was the sixth season. Yeah,
That's
and I was there for the whole year.
Iconic things that you were a part of. I mean, we're almost 90 minutes now, so I mean, oh, God damn, I feel like we're just establishing this rapport. Thank you so much for this. Please come back. Obviously. Now that being said, I want to talk about what you're doing now and where you're at, and you're in New York right now.
At the moment,
very cool apartment, by the way. I dig the aesthetic you got going on. What are you doing now, Jill?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a writer. I'm more of a feature writer now, just because I like creating stuff. I like writing stuff on my own and then going out with it versus working on a daily TV show. So I like my time to be my own. And so I'm really a feature writer now. I am also an artist. So I've crossed, I basically have two parallel careers. And I am a painter. So I do that. And that's part of the reason why I'm in New York. But I still have my hand, a big hand in writing, and I basically have those two parallel careers. So that's kind of.
What kind of features do you like to write, and what kind of we'll talk about the media of that you like to paint in a second here, but what kind of features speak out to you? Do you write every day? Do you have multiple projects going on? Is there an opus that you have? What do you?
I have multiple projects going on. So I have a library of scripts. I have. Sometimes I work on 3 scripts at a time at different stages. It's, I'm try to get it to my manager, try to get it to my agent, try to get the projects out there. I learned not to think of any one project as like your special baby or anything. You got to just keep moving and have another project and another project you're working on. So that way, no one project takes on so much weight. Obviously, right now we're in the middle of the writers thing, and so at the moment nothing's going on.
Right, of course.
Yeah, and so but I still write. I mean, it's almost compulsion. So I'm just in the apartment writing, and that's what I do with half of my time. And then the other half of my time, I am an artist, and I've had some shows downtown Manhattan, and I really have these two kind of parallel careers. So that's kind of what I'm doing now.
If any young aspiring creatives end up finding their way to this dialogue today, they're going to be looking at that and they're going to be going, "Holy shit. She's in an apartment in New York, and she spends her time between writing various projects and then going and painting things and having every once in a while a gallery display or a showing of her stuff, and they're sitting there in awe of the sentences that you just said." I would like to pick your brain a moment for your wealth of experience, clearly talking about the idea of not getting married to some of the projects of writing that you're doing and not getting too attached to it. Clearly that is something you learned either on Letterman or SNL or whatever. We've had writers come on here and talk about that, how they can't get married. The pace was so frantic. You find these good ideas, but don't get too attached to them. Be ready to evolve them, be ready to throw them away, be ready to move on to something else. You've done a good job already just in how you exist in talking about a lesson that you learned right there. But I'm going to ask it more pointedly now. If you have any advice to these young creatives out there, what would it be?
That you can't get focused on one project, and that the fact that one specific project hasn't gone forward doesn't mean the project's bad at all. It just means it's not the right time for that project, and that's why you got to have a bunch of things going at the same time. Especially when you're dealing with pop culture, it shifts and changes, and And it's about money. It's about what the buyers think will sell. So just recognize that, if you're there's a business, side to all of this, and that's what's moving, certainly the TV and film side. On the art side, money moves it too. And so you can have this kind of purist ideal that you don't care, and that's fine. But if you're trying to make a living at doing it, then you have to care and you have to understand how it works. And so it is both writing and art are businesses, and you need to understand how to maneuver within the business. And, with the art, I have more freedom, obviously. But with the TV writing, it's like, you don't want to get attached to any one project. You just want to, finish what you're doing, move on to something else, do that, move on to something else, do that, in terms of like this within the realm of like TV and film projects. And I write TV too. I write pilots. I have 2 pilots I'm trying to sell. Not right now because of the writer's strike, but but in when things pick up again, I mean, that's what I was doing right before the strike, is trying to sell my TV pilots and trying to sell my spec features. But at the same time, I spend a lot of time painting and doing that. So I basically live in two parallel worlds.
I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you saying that, succumbing to the idea, because I mean, it's very easy to lament or strike out against the idea that, unfortunately, on this side of the planet, when it comes to art and commerce, putting them together is unfortunately sometimes very, very strange bedfellows that contradict each other. I think that's part of the reason why the work stoppage is happening right now. You got creatives versus corporations, and how can we figure out ways on the macro level? How can we find ways for them to work together? But you even talking about that as an individual artist, saying, okay, you're a creative, you want to put some stuff out there. You have to accept the fact, whether you like it or not, that these two things are linked up, and you have to find a way to make that happen if you want to do this professionally as a full-time gig. I think that is a wonderful, wonderful message, clearly learned from years of experience, of all sorts of experiences. My God, Jill, what you have seen. I can't wait to talk again about this. We burned the Batgirl story, and I don't regret it even a little bit, because it's just happened so beautifully and organically. But I'm at a loss for a way to close things. So that being said, this is the Letterman podcast. Let's go back to Letterman for a second here. Looking back on that time with Letterman, if there were 1 or 2 things that stood out as life lessons that you got from that place. Clearly there was a lot of joy there. There was a lot of franticness, long hours, a lot of things. You were in this ecosystem, and you came out of it. 1 or 2 things that kind of, as I kind of set that table and put you on the spot, and hope for God's sakes that we can come up with something that's as close to the Batgirl story as possible in its entertainment value or its insight value. What were a couple of the takeaways that you took from late night?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a broad question.
I know, I'm hoping for anything at this point.
It was such a fun time. I mean, it really was. I had so much fun working on that show, and it was such a unique experience that, I mean, beforehand, I mean, Dave was really my idol. I was a college student, and I was in Georgia, and the fact that I could simply, I actually remember thinking one day in Georgia, okay, I don't know what to do with my life. If I could do anything at all, what would I want to do? Like, if there were no barriers,
and no boundaries.
If there were no barriers at all, and it was just total wish fulfillment, what do I want to do? And I thought, I want to work on the David Letterman show. And then within 6 months, I was working on the David Letterman show. And not only was I working there, but I was his personal assistant. And I had gotten myself to where, like, beyond I ever thought possible, where I wanted to be at age 19. And, that was just, so don't think something's impossible. Like, if anybody would have thought, oh, how can someone sitting in Georgia who knows nobody in entertainment, because I knew nobody, how can they get themselves not only there, but like at the prime, spot there? Everyone around the country would love to, like, shadow Letterman 24/7, and suddenly that was my job. And so that was like, that kind of gave me a life lesson at a very young age, that if you can like see it in your mind's eye, that can happen. You know, you set a course, and then just follow the course. And you know, like I said, it took me 6 months to get there, by calling every day and not feeling rejected, and just picking up the phone 2 weeks later and calling again. And I was able to you know, build a life where I had no Hollywood connections before. I mean, I knew nobody.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was no clear path, and I made the path, and you know, life kind of opened up and put me in this amazing situation.
Holy
So
shit, we did it. We did it. There, that like seriously, because the idea of not being afraid to dream, I think in the society that we live in right now, people can get distracted so easily with the polarizations that are happening, and tribalism and teams and all that kind of stuff. And in that, we certainly many times can lose our individuality and forget whimsy, and asking ourselves these introspective questions. If time and money were no object, what would I do? Okay,
right,
now identify that, which can be a tough thing in itself, but we
right,
identify it, and then some action towards it, whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're working a 9 to 5 somewhere. But if that dream is alive, and every week or every 2 weeks you do something just a little bit towards that action, you calling Colette,
yeah,
or whoever it was that you
it
were
was
calling there,
Colette.
like
Yep, yep,
moving towards it, a little bit of action towards that
yep.
dream, and having that dream as like, we don't dream enough anymore. And I think it gets beaten out of us with all of these things that happen around us that distract us. And it takes a creative to send that message sometimes, Jill. I really think that, and that is a beautiful sentiment, one worthy of ending the show on. We did it. Look at that. I cannot thank you enough for sharing that with people, because again, it's what I'm doing now. I'm a 47-year-old man. That is exactly what I'm doing here.
Yeah, yeah,
100%. That's what I'm doing here, with no outcome except for the results of manifestation in the universe, and trying to put out good work, trying to work
right.
towards these dreams. And it's the thing that take my family out of the equation. I think I said this to you on the phone. It brings me more joy than almost anything in my life. And I don't get paid for it, but I don't care, because this is the
Yeah,
thing that fires me up for the other things in my life. And it turns
right.
life from black and white into color.
Yeah.
And you just gave me a life lesson in saying that, Jill. I can't thank you enough for that. I'm really grateful that this connection has started. I can't wait to nurture it more and have you on again. Thank you so much for sharing your time on this weekend morning to be on the Letterman podcast. I just
You're
appreciate you
welcome.
so much.
Thank you so much. No, I've enjoyed talking to you. I really appreciate it.
We'll say our goodbye privately. I'm going to hit stop now. We'll say our goodbye privately, and I'll shoot a separate outro. So thank you so much, Jill. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay, that was so much fun. Jill Bayor is just a delight to me. I am so, and I'm certain a delight to everybody out there as well. How about that Wheel of Cheese story? You know, we've talked off camera. She has pictures of that. They're just not with her, and I don't know that they're digitized. But the idea, like, apparently there's pictures from the 14th floor of the aftermath of the Wheel of Cheese being splattered all over 6th Avenue by a bus. And if this episode has taught us anything, New York City bus greater than Wheel of Cheese. That was so much fun. And I mean, we just hit the tip of the iceberg with her, like we do with so many of our guests here the first time that they're on. Cannot thank Jill enough for taking her time to open up her memory banks and her heart. Like, what a sweetheart. You know, you could just see. I wish that every artist out there has had the opportunity, or has the opportunity to kind of explore that the way that Jill has. Yes, you know, in the world of entertainment and in the hustle and the bustle and and whatnot, and the realism of that, the fact that she understands and has submitted, you know, to the idea of art and commerce having to do a thing to do some sort of a dance together. I just love that message. Yeah, we didn't get a chance to talk about Rupert and you know, our one sponsor for the Letterman podcast is Rupert G and the Hello Deli. If you want any Late Show with David Letterman merchandise, please go to hello-deli.com sooner than later, because the deli is for sale. We got mugs, shirts. Rupert has mugs, shirts of Late Show with David Letterman, but also of Rupert. And I would get those soon. You know, I was on another show this last week, and the host Jay talked about how these are going to be a collector's item, and they are. You know, these Rupert G's Hello Deli shirts are going to be a collector's item, because soon Rupert G will not own the Hello Deli anymore. I talked to Rupert a couple of days ago, and there's movement, and I'm not going to say anything else. There's movement, though. There are bites on the of course there are. It's a national, or it's a New York landmark now, the Hello Deli. So yeah, drop Rupert a line, drop an order for some Late Show or some Rupert merchandise, and let's all give him some love, because I mean, he's finishing up a pretty legendary run as well. So hello-deli.com, Rupert G and the Hello Deli, the only sponsor of the Letterman podcast. I am just so grateful. Can't go an episode can't go by without talking about how grateful I am for this thing. Lots more to come, to borrow a phrase from Mr. Carson and his production. This has been another episode of the Letterman podcast with Mike Chisholm. Coincidentally, I am Mike Chisholm. Thank you and good night.
Overcoat and underpants.